Brought to you direct from Studio 3B at Baird Brothers Fine Hardwoods, the American Hardwood Advisor is your source for trends, tips, and insights into how the building industry has evolved. Join me, Steve Stack, along with guest builders and industry leaders as we talk shop and go in depth on what it takes to be the best of the best. Dive into topics like architecture, industry trends, project plans, historical tools, tricks of the trade, and life's lessons from more than 6 decades of experience in the hardwood lumber business. Hey everybody, welcome back to Studio 3B out here at Baird Brothers Fine Hardwoods. Steve Stack, Director of New Business Development, and we have a very interesting, educational interview coming up with you folks today. Amy Shields, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Amy Shields, Executive Director of Allegheny Hardwoods Utilization Group from Western Pennsylvania. I hear you're going to teach us some stuff today.
I'll try. I'll try.
I know the group, the Hug group that you're with, but I know you have a lot of other associations and anything from education to legislation, advocacy groups. Mm-hmm. You're a busy girl.
Yeah, yeah, we are. I'm very busy. AHUG's they got a lot of work under their mandate, a lot of different areas of focus, and so it keeps me very busy.
Good. One of the big things, and before we start talking about some of the programs and things that you guys implement over in Western PA, I heard it in conversation earlier. You're on the education side now, but at one time you and your husband had a sawmill operation?
Yeah, well, my husband and his brother had a sawmill. So in 1988, my husband and his brother bought a sawmill. Back then, they basically were just buying themselves jobs. Neither one of them had any experience in that. My husband's got a geography degree, and my brother-in-law was kind of looking to get into construction, but instead he went to lumber grading school, and my husband kind of shifted his focus to learning about timber and how it grows and how to buy and sell it. And then I came along in 1992 and joined the operation. I've got an accounting background. That's my field.
Okay.
So we had that mill from 1988 to 2006 when it became then part of the Bingaman organization, Bingaman Lumber out of Pennsylvania. So we were looking to try to figure out where we wanted to go in the future. That was back in 2006. Folks were everyone was putting in dry kilns, and globalization was kind of becoming the big ticket, and we weren't really sure if we wanted to expand to that degree. So just so happened, one of our lumber customers also said, have you guys ever considered selling your mill? And we got to talking, and it was a fit. They were like family. So my husband and I and my brother-in-law initially managed that facility in Elk County, Pennsylvania for the Bingamans. They also owned another mill over in eastern Pennsylvania, similar size. So then we managed that one as well. And then in 2015, they bought a third mill in south central Pennsylvania. And at that point, my brother-in-law retired. My husband and I managed all 3 of their sawmill locations for them. And then in 2019, we decided, we were going to step back from the sawmill business, and I had been a long-time board member and volunteer with AHUG, so he kind of stepped into retirement, and I stepped into the executive director seat at AHUG in January of 2020, and I've been there for the last two and a half years.
Very good. So, folks, I've had the opportunity in traveling to the Pittsburgh Home and Garden Show. Mm-hmm. And that was where I met Amy, and we have a mutual friend in the Hickman family.
Right.
And so we've had limited conversation, and I was thinking after our conversation and a little bit of time we spent together down there, I said, this lady is interesting. I said, I need to introduce her to our audience, and so I invited you over, and thanks again for coming across.
Well, thank you.
we appreciate it. And you know, we have a lot to talk about, and I got to go right to the kiddos.
Okay.
Okay. And it involves a story that I heard a little earlier, but it involves the Pennsylvania Division of Agriculture, I believe it is.
Department of Agriculture.
Department of Agriculture, the Woodmobile.
Right.
Okay. I visited that every year when I go down to the Pittsburgh Home and Garden Show.
Right.
And folks, I don't know, it's a 40-foot
Yeah,
van.
I think it's 40 feet, something like that.
And it is quite the assembly of education, history,
Right. Interactive
everything from interactive
displays.
displays and devices in the trailer
Right.
to coloring books for the kiddos.
Yeah.
And take me through that a little bit. I
Okay.
mean,
Okay.
that's a cool. Folks. If you haven't seen it, go to Pennsylvania Department of
Pennsylvania
Agriculture.
Department of Agriculture's website, and you can just put Woodmobile in the search, and it's got its own page under the Hardwoods Development Council.
Young or old,
There's
it's
something
very
for you.
interesting.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. So I'll step back. I'll just tell you, back in, as I mentioned, we've been in this business a long time. One of our children, our oldest son, who's actually 28, when he was in first grade, came home and was very upset because he had learned in school that day that, the forests are being mowed down by the loggers. The example was really about the rainforest, but that didn't really come across in the lesson. What he heard from that was the oxygen's being pulled from the air every time we cut a tree down, and cutting down trees is a bad thing. So he came home and was very upset because his parents were in the business, and how could we possibly contribute to the end of the world as he knew it. So at that point I was really like, we really need to do something. Our kids are hearing the wrong message at school. That's what led me to get involved in AHUG, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit later about all of the different things under the AHUG mandate. But one of the primary things that AHUG does is education and outreach, both to the general public and to students. And in doing that, one of the primary ways that we do that is traveling with the Pennsylvania Woodmobile. So the Woodmobile is a joint effort between the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture and private industry in Pennsylvania. There are about 30 companies who have contributed material. If you walk in, the Woodmobile is just beautiful. It's cherry cabinets. It's got a beautiful white oak and walnut floor that was produced by Hickman Lumber. So just a great display. On one side, it shows a map of the state of Pennsylvania and where our forested areas are located. A big discussion about the history of our forests, how they were first. It was a softwood forest, 90% softwood back in the day when folks first arrived here and harvested everything for the building of the country and the fueling of the Industrial Revolution. So it kind of goes through that history, shows pretty frank pictures of what the hillsides looked like back then, but then moves into the discussion of how once those softwoods were gone, the hardwoods, which were always here, sprang to life and generated the forests that we see today. Shows there's a great section in there on invasive species. Part of the funding for the Woodmobile comes from the USDA, so they provide some invasive species and invasive pest monies for the Woodmobile to get that information out to folks. And then on the right-hand side of the inside is all about the industry. So everything from defining what primary manufacturing is to secondary manufacturing, the products that are made, how no part of the tree goes to waste. We've got statistics in there. Pennsylvania, the hardwood industry is the 9th largest employer in Pennsylvania. Over 60,000 people work in the industry, and we've got over 2,100 companies with a business presence in every one of Pennsylvania's 67 counties. So it's a huge player in our economy, and all of that information is there in the Woodmobile for folks to see. And then we've got a couple of interactive, we've got some touchscreen units that folks can learn about invasive species and pests. We've got some little turnstile games where folks can try to figure out the species, compare the bark and the leaf and see if you can guess what species it is. That's always a big popular one. We've got a display of hardwood baseball bats that were all made in Pennsylvania. And then we've got a case it's just loaded with items, and you're supposed to figure out which of the two things in that case are not made with any wood fiber. And it's a stumper. I won't spoil it. I'll wait till folks see the Woodmobile for themselves. But it's great. And we've got a ton of literature. Everything in there is free. Folks can take tree ID books. We've got books on identifying invasive plants and pests and what to do about them if you see them, how to get in touch with a forestry company to have someone look at your property. We've got puzzles and stuff for kids, coloring books. We just got, it's amazing, all of what's packed in the Woodmobile.
So a couple takeaways. Number one, there's no admission to walk through this.
Yep, it's free of
Woodmobile.
charge. Yep.
It's free of charge. And when you have a chance to visit, or if you're visiting online and going through it, two things stand out to me. A lot of things stand out, but two takeaways that I always admire. The wood bicycle.
Yeah.
And there's a pretty fancy guitar in there.
Right. So there's a bicycle that's made out of cherry and hard maple, curly maple, which is a stunner. People are always taken aback by it, and it's fully functional. That's the number one question we get: can you really ride this? And we do. And then there's also a Martin guitar that's made from trees that were harvested after Hurricane Sandy, and it's beautiful guitar, very valuable, and it's in there for display as well. So you mentioned earlier, originally Pennsylvania was laden with some of the softwood species, right.
the hem firs,
the
spruce.
Hemlocks and firs, and pine and spruce.
And when that was nothing short of devastated,
right,
right, an amazing occurrence happened.
Right. So the hardwoods were already part of our landscape. They just were not able to flourish because, softwoods their canopy really closes in and it creates that dark environment. And also I'll say it was devastating what happened with our forests, but it is also the reality that it fueled our nation.
Oh yeah.
That's how our cities were built. I mean, originally, the ship masts were taken from some of the tallest softwood trees in Pennsylvania, but that's where the lumber came from to fuel the building of the country. It's where the bark has a tannic acid, and that's what's used to make to tan leather. In the Industrial Revolution, all of those early machines were they were all belt driven, and all of those belts required, being tanned. They were leather. So that really fueled the Industrial Revolution in the country. So we did basically, harvest pretty much everything there was, and it left us with some with hillsides that were barren of trees, but there was seed source there. There were seeds. There were hardwood trees that were waiting to come to life, and that's really where our forest came from that you see today. And that mixture of all of our northern forest types, our all the different species that we have in Pennsylvania, they were all there. They're all native. So that's really what spawned that change.
So that makes for an easy spin in that Baird Brothers Fine Hardwoods, the resource that we use, it's very easy to say it's a natural, self-renewing, natural resource. And through your programs and your affiliations, you take it one step further. Mother Nature takes care of herself, but through processes and techniques and harvesting, management, and so forth, you guys enhance her work.
That's right. That's right. I mean, human interaction in a healthy forest is key. I mean, that's a big part of it. I mean, we have moved from that early model of all of the hillsides being bare of trees. We're not going to see that again. We've learned that lesson. So the ensuing 100 years has been about conservation and really understanding and building a forestry practice that is built on sustainability and management. And that's a key part of how forestry is practiced, not just in Pennsylvania, but in the hardwood forest. We're fortunate here in our hardwood forest on the eastern side of this country that if done well and done forcefully and if people are aware of it, it is we have natural regeneration here. So we don't really need to go out and replant every tree that we harvest. Those forest management processes that we employ to go in and really treat a forest as a garden, if you will, to enter in and remove trees periodically, to thin out the forest and to carefully cultivate what's there, and at the same time plan the forest of the future while you're growing that source that you can harvest and take product from is key.
And I've I've experienced it. I've been in the woods, and we were having a conversation about harvesting, and another partner of ours in the forestry logging end of it, he says, "Watch this." And it was a nice day out. There was some sunshine, but we were under the canopy. And it was a nice mature tree, had served its purpose, and it was time to be harvested. So he dropped the tree, and as soon as he dropped the tree, the sky opened.
Yeah.
And that sunlight came in.
Right. Hits the forest floor and
started
Yep.
getting that nutrition down to those youngsters
Right.
that had came off of
Right.
that tree.
That's right, and that's what foresters will do is enter into an area and take a look at the forest floor, make sure they see the beginnings of those seedlings and that they're there, and then through a practice of select cutting where you might go into an area and open up a specific area of the canopy, or a thinning where you're taking a tree here and there out of a larger area. All of that is designed to open up that canopy, get that light to the forest floor, and help that next generation of trees come along.
So it's all about managing the forest resource.
Right.
And through managing that, the forest gives you better production.
That's right. I mean, in Pennsylvania, we do have, all of those trees were harvested back in the day, and then, all of our new trees grew and they got to a certain age, and, we do have a situation in Pennsylvania where there are areas of just even aged forests, right? They're all older. We have some areas that have, very mature trees in that 80 to 100 year range, and then we've got a larger swath of forests in Pennsylvania who are at that 50 to 60 year range, but that's all that's in those forests. We need to create, and are working now to create, that young habitat, that young early successional forest, where we're really actively working to make sure there are young forests, middle-aged trees, and then the older trees, all in the same given stand. That's the best way to create an optimum healthy forest, and
So
all of that
you have
takes
that rotation.
continuous cycle and management,
Right.
and constantly entering and pruning. And
So you may go into a stand of timber and say, okay, we're doing 24 inches and above, knowing that has a certain age to it, or
yeah, even there, picking a certain diameter limit is generally not what they'll do to promote a good mix of forest ranges. Even in a situation where they do have a lot of large mature trees to take out of there, even in that sense, they'll leave a few of those. You know, they might not take all of those out of there because that's the seed source for the next gen. A tree will eventually stop doing that, and eventually it'll be its turn to be harvested as well. But really, the foresters are very in tune with making those decisions and making sure we have a good mix of each class.
Mother Nature has seen to it in the hardwood species that they will self-regenerate, repopulate. Mm-hmm. And that's amazing in and of itself. I think it's even more amazing, one of the primary services that tree gives us while it's alive in the forest, and you know where I'm going with it. Take us through, because of forest, we have fantastic air quality.
Right, that's right. So, this is a big hot topic at the moment. Everyone's talking about the climate and how our forests are going to play a role in climate change. And really, that's another reason why it's really important to focus on this mix of young, middle-aged, and old trees in a forest stand, because trees, there's a difference between sequestering carbon, which is pulling the carbon out of the atmosphere, and storing carbon, which means I'm just hanging on to it and it's in my cells and it's not going to go anywhere. So trees don't actually, young trees actually pull more carbon from the atmosphere as they grow. And then the older they get, that cycle of pulling carbon slows down and they just become carbon storage. And then a tree left to stand and not be harvested and utilized will then eventually fall over. And when they fall over, their carbon starts to, come back out into the atmosphere. So there is a good, forests are great in that entire climate and carbon cycle conversation. What we are working towards is really understanding that optimal mix of having young trees for sequestration, old trees for carbon, older trees for carbon storage, but then harvesting those trees at a certain point in their life so that we can make use and make long-term storage of carbon out of the produced goods. Because this bench is storing carbon and it will be there for a long time. If the same tree that makes this bench is allowed to just fall over in the forest and degrade, its carbon is released back into the atmosphere. Yep.
And that's it. I mean, that tree lives on in a product for a long
as the product is here.
Yeah. You're using this carpenter's bench as a visual aid here, and this dates back to 1890.
Yeah, right. And it's still storing carbon. So, right.
So there is long-term benefit.
That's right.
Through harvesting and utilization.
That's right. And that's the mix that the carbon programs need to really hone in on, is this world where it all kind of lives in harmony, where we're working on our forest to create a mix of young, middle-aged, and old trees, but we're also recognizing that the long-term carbon storage of a produced good is a valuable part of that carbon conversation.
So through proper management, we get, as humans, we get great benefit from that stand of timber, that forest. Not to even mention the benefit to wildlife.
Right. Yep. Yep. That young forest is also, young, middle-aged, and old forest provides habitat to certain creatures all along the way. So when we talked a few minutes ago about how some areas of Pennsylvania have very mature forests, and some people will walk into a mature forest and think they're seeing a healthy forest because it's just a bunch of tall, straight trees, but they don't really see anything in the undergrowth.
Right.
That's actually not a healthy forest. And what we found in there, and one of the big focuses currently, is that is actually very poor habitat for songbirds. Songbirds need early successional. They need those young trees, that young brush and those young trees, in order to come in and flourish in an area. So, but there are other creatures who might need an older forest. There are some raptors, for example, who thrive in an old growth habitat. But interestingly, they might feed in a young successional, so they need some of that young forest next to them. So, and the same is true, when you see a timber harvest, some folks might look and see that the treetops have been left in the forest, and they think that's a bad thing when they see that. That creates not only protection for the seedlings so that they're not eaten by deer, but it also provides habitat and cover for turkey and grouse and woodcock and all of those bunnies, all of that. So
you mentioned the wildlife species I was thinking of, and my association with it and self-witnessing it is the beech tree. Beech trees are like a turkey's best friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
The mature tree, not only does it drop the seedlings, and in the spring, this time of year, when those seed pods start to sprout, the turkeys go crazy over them. Yeah. And after they've had their fill and did their strut for the day, where do they go back to? They go back to that mature beech tree and use that as a roosting tree.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
So really, it's a big, having a healthy forest with all the diversity in age class is a huge factor in the kind of wildlife and birds that we see in the Pennsylvania forest too.
Okay, so you're giving me an education. Let's talk about some of your other educational projects that you folks take on, and I know a few, the paper making projects, the tree cookie and the forest of many uses. Right. Just touch on it.
Okay, so I mentioned a few minutes ago about AHUG working with the Pennsylvania Woodmobile. When we partner with the Woodmobile, we generally will do a number of stations for students when they come in. And these first couple that I'll mention are targeted towards elementary age students, about grades 3 to 5. But we use a project or a program called Project Learning Tree. And Project Learning Tree has just, I think they have 96 different activities from K through 12th grade that you can use to just bring awareness to students about the forests themselves, about the forest products industry, about the jobs and careers that are available. But a couple of the ones that we do pretty regularly, one is called Forest of Many Uses. And in that one, the kids all become a tree in the forest, and an individual tree. And we put them all in a group, standing up, and then we walk through them and we sprinkle different colors of construction paper, yellow, blue, and green for sunlight, water, and nutrients. And we sprinkle those around, and then we tell the kids when we say go, you can grab as much of the sunlight, water, and nutrients as you can get without moving your left leg. You have to keep your taproot still. And when they do that, they'll find that most of them didn't get much water, or they didn't get a lot of sunlight, or they didn't get much nutrient. And then we'll talk about how a forester can come through an area and help a landowner figure out how to thin their forest or manage their forest. We'll take a few of the kids and tap them on the head and tell them they're going to head to the log truck, and then that gives us an opportunity at the end of the exercise to talk about what becomes of the logs that went to the mill. And then we go back through and do the same exercise, and now they're able to gather more sunlight, water, and nutrient, and it's a really great visual for them of how thinning a forest is a good thing and how it helps. And we talk about things like, why we leave certain trees along this imaginary stream, right? Because we want to make sure that canopy stays over the stream and keeps the water cool, because the fish need it to be able to thrive. But that's a really good visual for the kids. They enjoy that one. Another one that we do is tree cookie. We'll take really just a slice off the end of a couple of logs, take them into the classroom. We're able to talk to the kids about how trees grow, how they add growth rings. We talk to them about how their own food source moves in the body of the tree, and the phloem and the cambium and all of that stuff. And then we'll count the growth rings, and then we'll have the kids actually mark on that tree's lifeline where different things happened. How old was this tree when you were born? How old was this tree when something significant happened in my community? And it really builds a a connection, to the students that, these trees are here, they came from my community, and, our forests are a living, breathing, piece of our community. So we do those programs for elementary students. We also do career fairs for all age groups, talking about all the different careers that are available in the hardwood industry across the state. We have gone out and we've got a couple of community colleges in our area, so we'll provide connection with industry to bring in speakers on subject matter, from careers to invasive species or just whatever subject matter that they might be looking for. So we do a fair amount of that outreach too.
So very similar to our local Home Builders Association, the HBA, and I'm tying this together in that the HBA is there for construction industry individuals, whether it be through education, career opportunities, or more importantly, and you haven't mentioned it yet, you go to the National Association of the Home Builders.
Right.
And I know that you folks also represent the landowners, the forest managers, et cetera, at both the state and federal levels.
Yep, we do a lot of interaction with.
And when the circle comes back around, you are representing those
That's right.
property owners.
That's right.
And you're going to bat for them
Yep.
with the big boys.
That's right. That's one of the mandates for AHUG as well, is providing representation for the industry. Our industry is very segmented, but it's also there are a lot of small businesses, from loggers, landowners, land managers, sawmills, secondary manufacturers. They don't all have time to be out there advocating for themselves, but they have needs. And so we do a lot of legislative interaction, a lot of taking legislators out on tours to inform them about forest practices, but also to take the needs, be it workforce development or environmental regulation, whatever it might be, back from our companies to the legislators. And we do that and again, I'm a regional organization. I cover the 14 counties of Northwest and North Central PA, and I'm one of the 3 hardwood utilization groups in Pennsylvania. We work hand in hand with our state forestry trade association, Pennsylvania Forest Products Association, which I believe Baird is a member of. They are our state level advocate, but we do a lot of work with them. And then on the federal level, we're very fortunate in our region of Pennsylvania that we've got a great relationship with one of our U.S. Representatives, G.T. Thompson, who's actually on the Ag Committee for the House. So that's a really key connection for us on the federal level. And in that work, we also, AHUG's been fortunate to be part of a a national level consumer awareness program that's being put together called the Real American Hardwood Coalition. That's also a federal level, program that we're very lucky to be a part of. I'll get into that if you want, but I'll wait.
Something to look forward to, and we'll definitely want to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
So you and your organization, you're the boots on the ground,
Right.
working with the individuals, the people managing the forest. You're educating, you're consulting them on proper management, and then you're their advocate. You're their voice, right, on the far end of things. In between, I have to believe, and you having a background in it, somewhere along the line, safety and procedures have to come in from the forest has been managed, now it's time to harvest.
Right.
So the loggers,
Right.
from the loggers to the sawmill,
Right.
and then from the sawmill to Baird Brothers. And
Yep.
do you have safety?
We do. We work hand in hand with, in Pennsylvania, the biggest logger safety training program in our state is called the Sustainable Forestry Initiative of Pennsylvania. Sustainable Forestry Initiative is a North American forest certification program, but each individual state has a state implementation committee, and our state implementation committee is deeply involved in logger training. And it extends beyond loggers, foresters, truck drivers, a lot of folks in that primary processing capacity. So yeah, there are about 900, I think, card-carrying, fully trained, safety certified hardwood professionals through the SFI program. And AHUG works with them to put training programs on. We have one coming up next week in first aid and CPR, but they're also trained in chainsaw safety. And, we had a program earlier this week on rural trauma survival for a logger, how to care for yourself in the event of a catastrophe until help gets to you. Yeah. So we do an awful lot of work with SFI and the logging community.
That's interesting. And we know in our industry the inherent dangers, but if you can present it to someone enough,
yes,
it's there.
It's there. And that group is also, we're working really hard on the, that safety track record is also a big part of what the workers' compensation rates are for the logging community in Pennsylvania. That's another big area of emphasis that we're working on. That kind of takes us across the gamut, though, of safety training and also that legislative connection as we work on those things.
So you have this organization, AHUG, you yourself representing 14 counties, and you have partners throughout the state in other regions.
Right.
Do you see the same type of organization through other states in the country? I actually haven't yet encountered anyone who does it quite the way Pennsylvania does it, in that sense with the regional organizations. I think there are some regional logging groups here in Ohio that I'm aware of. All of the hardwood states that I'm aware of have something similar to Pennsylvania Forest Products Association, their state-level trade association. For us in Pennsylvania, the HUGs really got started, and actually our group was the first of those. AHUG got started back in the early 80s when there was simultaneously this need that industry was looking to raise awareness of the quality of the hardwoods in Pennsylvania, and also the industry who was providing them, and what the key connection was in their ability to thrive as an industry and how that related to forest health, right? Because that's where the boots on the ground, that's how the forest management gets done. At that same time, there was also the beginnings of the environmental movement heading into Pennsylvania. My region is home to the only national forest in Pennsylvania, the Allegheny National Forest. And we started to see protests, some work to actually stop harvesting in Pennsylvania. In addition to the Allegheny National Forest, that area that I work in primarily is also has probably the highest concentration of public land overall in the state of Pennsylvania. We've got not only the national forest, but a lot of Pennsylvania state forests and Pennsylvania game lands in that area. So, having an industry that's based there and then having public land management there as a key driver, there's a need for constant dialogue between the two so that the industry gets the resource they need, but the land management folks get, the responsibility that they need in managing those forests well. So that was sort of the birth of AHUG, and that spawned several other similar hardwood utilization groups in Pennsylvania. And then the need through the Department of Agriculture to kind of put an umbrella organization over all of us so that we
could function together as a team, and that's how the Hardwoods Development Council came along, where the Woodmobile is currently housed.
And that's no small task.
It is not.
In that Pennsylvania is one of, if I'm not mistaken, one of the largest hardwood producing states in the United States.
Yep, we are the, I'm not sure if we're still exactly the leader, but I think we're the leader in hardwood production and hardwood export. We export over $1 billion worth of logs and lumber product every year. Our industry itself provides $21 billion worth of economic development and impact to the state's economy, and $36 billion a year in indirect impact. So it's a huge driver. We are one of the largest hardwood producing states in the country. The state itself is about 60% forested, with just under 17 million acres of forest land. So it's a huge.
You know, I have conversation with folks, and here at Baird Brothers we offer the core group of native hardwoods: the poplar, the maple, the cherry, the hickory, the ash, the red oak, the white oak, the black walnut, if I didn't say it. And they say, well, where does it come from? Where do you get it? And I tell people, we very closely located to you here in Ohio and you in PA. I tell people we're in Hardwood Heaven.
Yep. And that area of Pennsylvania is really, we refer to it as the wood basket. If you look at the map of Pennsylvania, we've got a huge chunk of forested area in that upper, northwest, north central region. We've got another in the south central part of the state. And then we've kind of got Pittsburgh and Philly on either side of that. And then we've got the northern tier to the eastern part of the state is also heavily forested. But there's no doubt you're right in the heart of it here.
We look at
West
being
Virginia.
here in Ohio.
Yeah.
We have Pennsylvania to the east. Then we have West Virginia.
Yeah.
Then we have Kentucky. Then we swing around and catch Indiana, and we have a little entrance up into Michigan.
Yeah.
If you want some of the premier hardwood in the United States, we have access to it. Pennsylvania cherry.
Yeah. Cherry has always been a bread and butter species for us in Pennsylvania. We're known as the black cherry capital of the world, and specifically that region of north central Pennsylvania, where I'm from. Has really been a key driver in the economy of our forests for a long time.
And folks may not realize, they may not know it, different species thrive in different regions.
Yeah.
And why do they do that? The mineral content in the soil conditions.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about some of the most premier cherry lumber in the world.
Right in our region. One of the other things that AHUG has on their plate is support for hardwood research and development. So one of the things that we're wrapping up right now, Pennsylvania has a PA Farm Bill. We've been really lucky to have that in the last couple of years, that it funds a lot of training, a lot of research and development work on the ground. But one of the projects that we were funded for was a study about why birch seems to be having such a heyday in our region. It's become sort of a prolific regenerator in the last 2 decades, and we're trying to understand why that is, because at the same time, we're also seeing a slight decline in the quality of our cherry. And not just in the quality of it, but in the regeneration of it. So it's regenerating more slowly, a little less successfully, and we're trying to figure out why. So there are some things that seem to go hand in hand with that together. One being that if you look at the map of Pennsylvania, our specific region has traditionally had a lot of nitrogen deposited in our soil, which is something that cherry thrives on and that birch is the opposite for. As things like the Clean Air Act came to be, 2 decades ago, that's had an impact on how, what happens in the central part of the United States impacts the air quality and the soil deposition for some of those things like nitrogen in our soil.
Yeah.
And we believe that's having some impact on why we're seeing cherry decline and birch thrive. So that's just something else that AHUG's involved in, where we get to dip our toes in a lot of different waters out there, but it helps us bring a well-rounded host of information back to our companies that they need.
Very, very interesting. And folks, if you want to learn more about forestry management, educational programs available from Amy and the group over at AHUG.
Right.
What's the best way for them to get hold of you, Amy?
Oh, just actually just go to our website, www.ahug.com. It is in the revision process, so we're working to build a better site, but it'll give you the contact information to get in touch with us so that we can reach out and provide whatever assistance you might need.
Any other good resources that people can dive into to educate themselves a little more?
Yeah, sure. The Pennsylvania Hardwoods Development Council, as I said, if you go to the PA Department of Agriculture, Hardwoods Development has their own site. There's some good information there about our industry. The Pennsylvania Forest Products Association is another, that's really our state trade association, so they've got a lot of great info about who the players are in the hardwood game in Pennsylvania. We're also very fortunate to have Penn State in our pocket there in Pennsylvania. We do a lot of work with Penn State Extension. They've got an amazing website that's just filled with information on, timber management, how to look into having a timber sale on your property, but also things like spotted lanternfly and all of the various invasive pests and plants that we have kind of creeping into our wheelhouse in Pennsylvania. So all of those are really good resources to check out.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this today. We've had a great visit from Amy Shields, Executive Officer of Allegheny Hardwood Utilization Group. Amy,
thank you.
It has been our pleasure having you today.
Thank you.
Don't be a stranger. And we're going to have some more conversation about maybe a visit later this fall.
Yeah,
Okay?
we'd love to bring the Woodmobile out. And,
yes,
that'd be
we'll
great.
work on that.
Okay.
Folks, for now, Steve Stack from Studio 3B. Stay tuned, stay up on the socials, and we'll see you soon. For all you folks listening, thanks for talking shop with Baird Brothers Fine Hardwoods. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the American Hardwood Advisor series, give us a like and subscribe. For more tips, projects, and inspiration, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or at BairdBrothers.com. Until next time,